Welcome back to Muslim Minds. We've been out for a bit, but now we're back and we'll be reacting to Piers Morgan versus Jordan Peterson on the Hamas-Israel war and his give him hell tweet that he tweeted at like the October 7th, basically, when everything started. So anything you want to say before we start? Interesting,
Free Palestine.
interesting suit.
Actually, sounds like a joke.
It's
Free
a Halloween, Halloween costume.
I know. Red, white, blue.
Well, I'm joined now by Dr. Jordan Peterson. Jordan, great to have you back on the program. A lot has happened since you were last on just a few weeks ago.
Why does he look so sad?
I want to start by saying that I'm wrestling with a lot of moral quandaries about this war. And I'm hoping that through our conversation today, we might get to at least have some clarity about the moral quandaries and see if we can work out what we should be thinking about this, because I think it's very complicated. And
It's really not complicated. There's nothing to wrestle about. If you know the history, it's as simple as this. You don't need to overcomplicate it. People lived in Palestine for several thousands of years. Their families have lived there. Muslims have lived there since the Sahaba's time, and the Christians and the Jews that lived in those areas have lived there even beyond that. This state of Israel and the people that live in the state of Israel as it is today came in, removed the Palestinians from their home. You can look it up. The Israeli settlers are open about seizing more Palestinian territories, lands, and neighborhoods and removing the Palestinians. It's a removal, it's a dispossession of their homes. And what you see right now, this overreaction of Israel, is a genocide. 3,000 plus kids have died. That is more than the immediate deaths on 9/11. And you want to say this is a what kind of retribution is Israel looking for? I saw this interview today, and the interviewer, he asked, I forget his name, but he asked a very good question to his interviewee. He said, if Hamas was in Israel, would they be bombing everything left and right? Schools, hospitals, churches? Would they be bombing that left and right center? No, they wouldn't. They wouldn't do that. But they're doing it in Gaza because they don't care how many kids it takes to wipe out Hamas. Almost 10,000 people have died to wipe out Hamas. How do they even know they're hitting Hamas? You know what they're doing.
got to be nuanced, this conversation. Do you feel any moral quandaries about it?
Well, I don't think you can have a war without moral quandary. I mean, a war is the consequence of an unsolvable moral quandary. And so it's not surprising that the conversation surrounding the war is full of moral quandaries, because if it was straightforward and simple, and if there was an easy path forward, then there wouldn't be a war. And so, I mean, I can tell you what I think is going on to the degree that you can reduce it to something quickly explicable. You know, I think Iran is desperate because of the tenuous hold on power that the mullahs now have in Iran, given their own citizens' rebellion.
If it's complex, why don't we come with more viable solutions? Like, why don't you send in, from the beginning, ground troops to exterminate Hamas and have your special forces fight like men? Because they will die, but they're army. They signed up for that. But it's just a given that in warfare, you're supposed to protect the lives of civilians, women, and children. You know what I mean?
Like, yeah, just a bunch of Palestinian citizens dying for no good reason at all. Yeah, but also, yeah, Jordan Peterson, he's employed by the Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro's company. So I don't think, yeah, he's gonna give really like really biased viewpoints.
Because even our Christians can watch. I mean, you guys have seen the news and can sympathize. Man, they're bombing churches. Have you seen how many Catholics have died in Gaza? And the families are weeping over their loved ones. Weeping. What did they do, bro? Like, they probably have no affiliation with Hamas whatsoever. And just to give you guys an idea, Gaza, the Strip, is about the size. Like, if you guys know about U.S. cities, you know about Houston. It's about the size from like Sugar Land to probably
like
Greater Heights.
Yeah.
You know, but the thing is, it's so small, but 2 million people live there, which is about the population of Houston. Gaza is a small organization within the population of Gaza.
Hamas.
What is it?
Hamas is a small organization. You said Gaza.
Oh, sorry, Hamas. Now, not to say that Hamas is like some insignificant organization. That's not what I'm saying. But the population is massive, is what I'm trying to tell you guys. And they're being bombed indiscriminately. It's like someone bombing Houston. Like there are many people who have they have again no affiliation with Hamas. Especially like forget everybody. What about the Catholics? What about their churches being bombed? Right? What's the justification for that? Oh, Hamas is there. Do you guys not see that excuse? Oh, Hamas
Especially a hospital.
I think they see the Abraham Accords, which were the most significant step forward towards peace in the Middle East for like 75 years. They see the Abraham Accords as an existential threat. This is a last-ditch attempt by the Iranian mullahs to use the Islam against Jews story to prop up their own dismal reign. And so they rattled the chain of their Hamas.
I don't even understand what he's talking about.
That's Jordan Peterson for you, just a word salad. But he's talking about, he said
Muslims aren't against Jews to begin with.
They're
saying they're against Israel and what their state did.
He's trying to oversimplify
Jews
the
live in
narrative of the
Islamic
Iranian
states.
mullahs. You know, he's trying to oversimplify.
Yeah, I don't know much about that situation,
Yeah.
but I don't know what that even. Why is he starting off with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's what you're gonna really open the gate with when there are innocent civilians dying on both sides. Iran.
Puppets and said, provoke, and they did. And their hope is that the Israeli response will be so overwhelming that the Arab world turns against them, and maybe even the people who might be inclined to, be swayed by a victim narrative in the West, and that the Abraham Accords will fall apart, and that'll be the end of that. And that could happen. And I'm hoping it won't, because I think the Abraham Accords were, and it's irritating to me, for whatever utility that is that I think I know, insofar as you can know such things, that Saudi Arabia would have signed the Abraham Accords 2 years ago.
I see as a contradiction and hypocrisy, whenever these Israeli supporters are confronted about what's happening to the Palestinians or the Gazans, you know what they say? I feel sorry for them because it's Hamas's fault, right? So are they the victim or are they not? If you're sorry for them because of it's Hamas's fault they're being bombarded, that means they're the victim. You can't in one breath say, oh, they're not the victim, they brought upon this themselves, and then the next breath say that they're not.
Biden would have moved a little bit more forthrightly on it. And I think the reason that he didn't and the Democrats didn't was because they didn't want to give Trump any credit for anything that he had attained in his administration. And I think all of that is appalling. And, I see this story of Muslim against Jew being put forward in this propagandistic manner. And I think, well, the Muslim world has to make a choice too, because it doesn't look to me like they're
I haven't heard any Muslim saying Muslim against Jew.
If anything, bro, with all what's been pumped out on social media by independent resources and people just trying to flood the media with what's actually happening in Gaza, aside from this BS nonsense you see on the media, one thing that they keep repeatedly saying is we're not against Jews, it's against Zionism. Zionism is the problem. This concept of Zionism is what's so detrimental to, the Palestinians, right? Not Jews.
The prime minister of Israel is an atheist. He's not even Jewish, I heard. Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yeah, because
they literally hate him. They were going to overthrow him recently.
Yeah, because Zionism is more like a secular Jewish state. It's not really rooted in religion. Yeah. It's more kind of like a nationalistic type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's a political thing, which we talked about in our podcast that YouTube deleted.
Yeah.
Rumble. We're going to be posting on that soon. But
we interviewed someone whose family lives in Gaza. His grandmother's house was bombed, and that interview was taken down.
Proper champions is the government in Iran, and it's not like the Saudis don't have their flaws, and perhaps the rest of the Arab governmental structures, but the Islam world should move in the direction of the Abraham Accords. That would be great for everyone. We could have a real peace. We could have something approximating a union of the Abrahamic people, and I think the accord was named extraordinarily well. Or we could have what we've had for the last...
Jordan? Really? You really think that everyone's going to be kumbaya, happy and peaceful? It's not going to be the case. The Israeli settlers are foaming in the mouth at taking more and more Palestinian land. Look at the map. Over 75 years, all that's happening is that land is being taken away slowly but surely. You think that if the Palestinians finally just give up and let everything that's happening to them just continue for several more years, that there's just going to be some kind of two-state solution and imaginary peace. It's not going to happen. The Palestinians are going to be wiped out. Their lands are going to be taken. They're going to be forced to go nowhere except confined in a small strip, not even the size of a proper city of 2 million people, in the largest open air prison in the world, where their food, gas, and electricity is controlled by another state. They can't go in or out, and they are trapped. This is the kind of solution you want? Man, this guy's a clown.
75 years with the Palestinians as perpetual cannon fodder, at the beck and call of those for whom having them be cannon fodder is useful. And so, there's just moral quandaries everywhere there. It's a minefield. But that's what I think is the fundamental reality of the current situation. It's a propaganda war. And there's a lot at stake.
On October the 7th.
One side is being wiped out. 3,000 kids are dead under the excuse that we're trying to get rid of Hamas. Do what the U.S. did when they took out Osama. What did they do? They sent in their special forces. They sent in their troops. They didn't start just bombing the hell out of Pakistan. They actually went in and took them out like men. That's what the army is for, man. I'm sorry to say, right? Who should die? Special forces, children, women, kids, innocent civilians.
Hamas obviously committed a terror attack of appalling magnitude. Where were you when you first heard about it? And what was your instant feeling about it?
Well, my instant feeling was to be sickened by it. And it hasn't been that long since I was in Jerusalem. And so it was a little closer to me than it might have otherwise been. I'm also more sensitive to any signs of anti-Semitic catastrophe from studying the Holocaust for the length of time that I did. And I've always regarded Jews as the canary in the coal mine. And I think the reason that the Jews are the canary in the coal mine is because they're a successful minority. And if a culture can tolerate a successful minority, it's pretty damn robust and it's not very resentful. And as soon as a culture starts to get resentful, the Jews make an easy target, because they're a minority, and so that's an easy target to begin with. But then they're the minority that has the temerity to be successful. And that really brings the resentful out of the rat holes. And I've seen a rise in anti-Semitism online over the last 3 years. It's just stunning.
So you mean to tell me that this current situation and support for Palestine is anti-Semitic, when the Palestinians are also Semitic people? That doesn't make any sense. Zionism is also, it's rooted in the foundation of a state for the nation of Israel and the Jewish people, but it's not even backed by anything religious. So you remove one whole entire aspect of their culture away from it, right? And you also remove the oppression and taking and seizing of the Palestinian land, and then you are remained with this excuse as anti-Semitism. That's how
you know what's kind of funny? Conclusion. He's saying, throughout history, World War II, Jews were the successful minority. But actually now, given the current state, the Palestinians are the successful minority, in a way, because they've still held onto their land throughout history, and the Israeli people are the majority. So
Israel is backed by so many superpowers.
Yeah, Jordan's view is he's saying something like hypocritical, because now history is repeating. Israeli people are kind of doing genocide in a way. Hopefully don't get canceled. But now the Palestinian people are the minority. And so what? That's literally, he's being hypocritical.
There are videos online of the far-right Israelis gathering in front of the Temple Mount, dancing and singing about how there are no more children left in Gaza, no more schools left in Gaza. They're celebrating at that fact, right? You have videos of in schools in Israel where they teach them that Palestinians are not to be your friend. How many Arabs did you speak to today? What did they say? Like, just building this kind of like barrier between them from the very beginning because of this. That's actually, if you want to call anti-Semitism, again, you can say anti-Semitic towards themselves, and I would agree. But the Palestinians and their supporters are not anti-Semitic. We don't have problems with Jews. There are Orthodox Jews that support the Palestinian cause, and they will spit on the Israeli flag. They say we're not allowed to be even back in the land of Palestine because we're on diaspora. We're not supposed to come back until the Messiah comes because they don't believe the Messiah has come. But how can it be an anti-Semitic cause and Orthodox Jews are also advocating for Palestine and the freedom of Palestine and the rights for them to live and actually have self-determination and freedom? It's It's not anti-Semitic.
Nothing against Jewish people.
This is just
there's Jewish organizations against.
It's just
Israel.
a clever little phrase that you can keep spitting to make yourself look like the victim, even though you're backed by several superpowers.
Yeah, Israel is the majority.
Yeah, just like to say
with the world.
Yeah, just like to say Israel has the right to defend itself, even though it has bombed the hell out of Gaza. Almost 10,000 people now dead. 3,000 kids are dead. Churches, residential areas, hospitals. There are even videos
war crimes.
They're of the press. They're down there in Gaza in the strip. They see a car backing up because they see an Israeli tank because now they've begun the invasion. The tank just wipes out with that car with one blast. Even though they're turning away, they're bombing even the escape routes. Oh, flee to the south of Gaza. They're bombing the south as well.
Behold, on the right and on the left, but jointly. And then, well, so I was sickened by it, but then I was also immediately suspicious of Iran's role. And I mean, that doesn't require any particular perspicacity on my part. I think it's quite obvious, but that also opens up the rat's nest of the maneuvering, the political maneuvering around the Abraham Accords, because, you know, I was very ill when the Abraham Accords were signed, and I couldn't or hadn't paid much attention. And when I sort of recovered my ability to see again, I saw that this remarkable peace process had taken place, and I could not understand for the life of me why it wasn't trumpeted on the front page of every newspaper across the world. And I also think that Trump's team should have got a Nobel Peace Prize for it. I cannot see how you can possibly make a counter-argument to that. For all of Trump's flaws and for his administration's flaws, this was a major accomplishment. And yet, and I know the Saudis were behind it. You know, they didn't sign it, but it wouldn't have gone forward without their nod and wink. And I believe that if Biden would have taken the opportunity and been a bit magnanimous in his response to Trump, which he could have been, instead of thinking of him as Satan himself, that he could.
I'm surprised Piers hasn't interrupted so far.
Oh, right.
He usually interrupts every 30 seconds, especially if it's a Palestinian guest.
Oh, yeah. Guys, look.
Peterson's been talking for 6 minutes straight.
If you are like supporting Israel and what they're currently doing, I just have a question. I want you to try to just break your bias and think about this for a minute, okay? If Hamas was in Israel, would they be doing the same level of indiscriminate bombings to get rid of Hamas? No, they wouldn't. Because the state of Israel and the people of Israel are more important than the lives of the Palestinians, which is messed up. They're civilians. They're still innocent lives. You know what I mean?
I think if there was if you're probably people in the U.S. watching this, if there's terrorists in Canada, minority, then you start just 10,000 innocent Canadians get bombed. Like, what the heck is that? That doesn't make any sense.
Think about that. You guys would be like, that's not the way to handle it. Why aren't you guys sending special forces in there if it's a huge problem in its play? Like, why doesn't the U.S. go right now and just bomb the hell out of Mexico and get rid of the cartel? All the cartel groups. Why not? Because how many innocent civilians are going to be caught up in it? I mean, you can think about the white phosphorus, which is a violation of
war law, whatever. International law.
International law. It's a war crime.
UN.
And then on top of that, also bombing places like hospitals is a war crime. Collective punishment, which is exactly what this is. Okay.
Yeah, what the heck?
These guys are camping out here.
The whole thing is collective punishment.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the devastation, and if you claim that's not collective punishment. So my question to you guys is like, do you really think what Israel is doing right now at the level with no end in sight, just continuous bombardment to the point where it's equivalent to the Hiroshima bombings, like Hiroshima and Nagasaki? So then, like, what do you guys like? What point is it sufficient? How do you even know? How do you know you get rid of all Hamas with this just level of just indiscriminate?
This stuff usually just creates more bad stuff.
Exactly.
All this stuff in the last 20 years is just caused by
what is Hamas
democracy.
Hamas is a retaliation to the oppression of Palestine. That's how these groups form. That's how they form.
Could have enticed the Saudis into a peace accord, and we wouldn't be in this damn situation now. And now we're playing it out the hard way, you know, because the Iranians could win the propaganda war, and they've got, God only knows how many agents they have in the West, you know, promoting the kind of social upheaval that we've seen on the streets in the last few weeks. And so the narrative could go either way. But I'm rooting hard for the Abraham Accords signees, and I hope they have the courage of their convictions, and I hope they can see that their way forward is the most appropriate way forward for the good of the Muslim world. Or what, are we going to stay in some 14th century conflict between the fundamentalist Muslim world and the Jews? Jesus, that sounds, you know, we've had enough of that, haven't we? You'd think.
Abraham Accords, they're going to have their
I asked Ben Shapiro what is a proportionate response to what happened on October the 7th? And he said there isn't one, that there is no proportionate response, and there shouldn't be. I mean, that in itself, I asked Vivek Ramaswamy when I interviewed him at the weekend the same question, and he was basically inferring the same, but he also said that, he would happily put the heads of 100 Hamas leaders on stakes along the border as a message to people not to commit this act. I thought that was a sort of medieval barbaric response to medieval barbarism, and that eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth is not the solution. I also believe that Israel has a fundamental right not just to defend itself after what happened, but has a duty to protect its people, and it has to take that duty obviously very seriously. But if your mission statement, as they've made clear, is to eliminate Hamas completely, and Hamas live in Gaza surrounded by civilians, among civilians, you can only do that. You can only get rid of Hamas with massive civilian casualties. And that's where I have this moral quandary about how much is too much.
Well,
does Israel...
If ISIS comes to the United States, embeds themselves in Houston, launches huge terror attacks, killing 1,000 to 2,000 people in, like, I don't know, New York, LA, whatever, right? Will America sit back and watch as the U.S. bombs the hell out of Houston?
It doesn't make much sense,
guys.
Why is it given a fact that it's the only option to just bomb?
It isn't the only option. That's what a ground invasion.
Actually, doesn't
why
make
are they
sense.
doing a ground invasion now? Then the whole point is the
ground
ground
invasion. Yeah, that doesn't even make sense. Then
they have sophisticated weaponry. That's what the military is for. Like, you do airstrikes when it's feasible, when you're wiping out a large group of them, when you know where they're at. But if majority of your casualties, thousands of people, almost 10,000 people are going to be civilians.
That's collective punishment.
Almost half of 10,000. Almost, we're going up to 5,000 kids, bro. How is the world watching back and they're just okay with it? Unless, and this is what happened with Iraq, you've dehumanized those people in the Middle East. The media and the world has successfully dehumanized to allow these kind of things to happen to them. Iraq didn't even do anything. They didn't have weapons of mass destruction. That whole thing was a fluke. It was all a mistake. And millions of people died.
It was on purpose. Mistake.
Millions of people died. No one cares. No one cares, because who are they? They're just a bunch of backwards Arabs. Imagine if the same thing happened. 1 million U.S. citizens died. 1 million Europeans died. Right? 1 million Israelis died. The whole world would be up in flames.
Yeah.
It would not be forgiven, but Iraq's just been completely destroyed. The people destroyed. I mean, how many innocent people died? The country is totaled. For what? You know why? They dehumanized them, allowed them to do whatever they want. People are watching. They don't care. They look at these Palestinians like they're animals. The Israelis, civilians on their TikTok, they're mocking innocent Palestinian deaths. Coloring in their teeth, putting on hijabs, holding fruit, and then pulling off the head of a baby. Like, you guys are sick. You're sick.
Israel get a license to do whatever it wants to eliminate Hamas, or should there be a limit? And if so, what is that limit?
Well, I don't think Israel will have a license to do whatever it wants, because what will happen inevitably, and I think if I was an Iranian propagandist, I would be counting on this. Let's imagine that Israel moves against Hamas with its usual effectiveness, and they start winning, in a serious way, and the casualties mount. Well, it's a lot easier to take a victim appreciation stance against a power that's clearly winning. So Israel can't win without accruing losses along the way, because the more they manifest their military superiority, the easier it's going to be for those who cast the Palestinians as victims to gain the moral upper hand. And so,
because they will inevitably look at the example I gave with the US or even Israel itself. It's because at the end of the day, if countless civilians are dying in the several thousands, they are victims. You even said it yourself. All you guys who support Israel said it yourself, that we feel bad for the Palestinians because of Hamas. If you feel bad for them, that means they are victims. You just change it. You say instead of Israel, it's of Hamas. So if they're still victims, so you cannot sit here, mock them, and say, oh, victim card, playing the victim mentality, or the victim card, when they are clearly victims.
And just saying because it's Israel and they're attacking the minority or whatever, that obviously Israel will get losses. That's not necessarily true for everything. They're doing something clearly wrong. Like, what the heck? If you attack bad people, then only dumb people would like be mad at you for wiping out people that should be wiped out in war. If it's morally wrong,
they have a good point. Why not use illegal weapons and just why don't we flatten all of Gaza? Because it's a proportionate response.
We're just using black and white responses on something that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, he wants to talk about how morally difficult it is, but then he's like, hey, you know what? Essentially, just what Jordan is saying. Israel...
Like, if you flip the whole thing on, and for the other perspective, for Palestinians, they wouldn't be for it.
Yeah,
it's like hypocritical.
Like, this is what Jordan is saying essentially, that Israel has the weaponry to just completely annihilate the Palestinians and take care of Hamas, and the Palestinians are just going to sit there and cry about it because of the response they're going to make themselves.
It's easy for them to do that.
It's like, what do you want them to do, bro? What do you want the world to do? What do you want the Muslims around the world and those who support the freedom of Palestine to sit there and watch when we know that this is all like, just like the Israeli supporters say Hamas is the reason for this. We say Israel brought it upon themselves. When you cage in a people, 2 million, you take their land and you kill them. Look what's happening in the West Bank right now. No Hamas. They're being killed too. Israeli settlers are going, right now, they're going in there taking more land. People are being killed, Palestinian prisoners are being stripped naked and beaten and kicked in the middle of the street. What the hell does that have to do with Hamas? Nothing. Actually, nothing. Right? You guys, man.
Oh, and that doesn't mean I know what Israel should do, because I wish I had that wisdom. But what I would like to see happen, in the best of all possible worlds perhaps, would be for the signees of the Abraham Accords to say to Israel, privately first, we're not budging. And then maybe to take a foray into the public and say that. It would be lovely to see Saudi Arabia come out and say, we're going to continue the Abraham Peace Accord process.
It's easy to just paint Hamas as terrorists when the IDF and the Israeli military is doing the same thing on a much greater scale of annihilating civilians. And then say, oh, they're terrorists because they went first, even though they never went first. They were birthed out of this oppression to the Palestinians. They're essentially taking away any kind of fighting resistance that they have and calling them terrorists to justify while doing it.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you even get rid of the only military structure a country has except by annihilating that entire country? That's essentially what they're trying to do here.
And then Israel could say, well, if the Abraham Accord holds and we have the probability of expanding it, we can take the risk of not being so devastating in our response to Hamas, and they could back off. But because there'd be a counter victory in it for them. And so I can't see a better pathway forward than that. And I think that's a potentially realistic pathway, especially because that would also have the side benefit of not allowing Iran to prevail. So that's the best I can do on how this might proceed in the most optimistic possible way. And I don't know if that's good enough or not.
On October the 7th, you tweeted, "Give them hell, Netanyahu. Enough is enough." And you got some blowback for that, as everybody
a lot
says anything about this. Were you surprised by the scale of the blowback? Do you wish you'd phrased that tweet differently? Do you have any regrets about it?
When thousands of innocent civilians are going to get blown to smithereens, it's not a very responsible thing to say. This is a tragedy. This whole thing, what happened to Israel, knowing what their response is going to be on the Palestinians, 99% of who, by the way, that will die, had nothing to do with the attacks. That's not a very smart thing to say, Jordan. All you got to do is just say, I messed up. It's not that hard. It's really not hard.
Twitter is a very complicated social media platform, and it's been difficult for me to learn how to use it wisely. And I'm not alone in that, because it's difficult to be wise on Twitter. Now, what I'm trying to learn is when a tweet is appropriate and when a long-form commentary is appropriate. And the rule, I think, is something like the higher the stakes, the more likely that the long-form commentary is necessary. And really, it would have been better had because I did release a YouTube video where I explained some of what we already talked about.
I saw it,
yeah. And that was received much better, let's put it that way, but it also gave me a chance to elaborate my argument. And so what it highlighted for me, and I felt, I was very taken aback by what happened in Israel. And I was also appalled because in my estimation, it was unnecessary. As I said, the Abraham Accords could have been extended earlier, and maybe this wouldn't have been necessary. And so I allowed myself to express some sentiment at that point without providing context. And that wasn't as good as providing the context.
Why does Jordan keep bringing up the Abraham Accords as kind of insisting that Israel will follow the rules and play by the books when they're not already doing that? They haven't been doing that. Illegally encroaching on land, stealing property, giving it to settlers.
Well, it looks like he's regretful of his tweet, though. Even though it's still really wrong. There's no excuse.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks like he's backtracking as, politically correctly he can.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm rethinking Twitter overall at the moment about how to use it. Elon has taken off the character limit.
So good.
Everything has to be like a whole philosophical formula. What?
What is Twitter? Let's break that down to its fundamentals and grab its core. Bro, shut up. Just say what you need to say and move on. I'm falling asleep, Jordan.
And he's also made it possible to distribute video. And so it no longer has to be a place where impulsive exchanges can occur rapidly. And I'm trying to reconfigure how I use it. I'm much happier with the video. Now, I was upset because I had developed somewhat of a Muslim following on YouTube, and I was very happy about that. A lot of people on the Islamic side of the world were watching my biblical lectures, for example, and and I've had extensive conversations with Muslims on my YouTube channel, and I burnt some of that up, and I'm not sure I did that. Well, I would say I'm certain I didn't do that in the most productive manner, and so do I regret it? It would have been better to do the long form, to have done the long form to begin with, And Twitter invites and rewards a certain amount of impulsivity, and it wasn't, I don't know, Piers, I don't know if it's ever time for impulsive action, especially when the stakes are...
The thing about Jordan is you guys need to see through him. He's asked, do you believe in God? And he sits there and he goes, what do you mean by what? What do you mean by do? What do you mean by you? What do you mean by believe? What do you mean by God? Bro, really? Just answer the question. You're so scared of everything. Everything has to be so pedantic and proper. And I have to use the most, complex words to describe the most simple thing or question or answer. Do you believe in God? And man, just like Hamza said, just became a freaking philosopher. What do words mean? Rahab, do you like pizza? What really is pizza, Hamza? It's essentially what this guy is. So if you guys really take him seriously, especially when it comes to stuff
saying
like this,
I like cheese and bread, I do. But I don't know about pizza, though. You have to define it more.
Yeah, don't narrow the subject of pizza just to cheese and bread.
Piers is not even saying anything. We've only gotten this. Everything that's happened so far could have been in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
What? Whatever.
I guess you're just letting him vent. I don't know.
Why does Piers he's about to cry?
I know, he's pent up,
Serious,
Yeah,
And
no,
so,
I completely get that. There's no doubt, for example, that what happened October the 7th was a form of hell for the victims and for their families.
These terms to the Palestinian kids: form of hell, atrocity, terrorist attack, white phosphorus blowing up hospitals. At what point can we say, hey, okay, they can't do that? Or can they do anything? I mean, can they just rain hell? Can they wipe them all out? Can they wipe them all out? Yes or no? Can
Well,
they
that's
just
what they're saying.
why,
Like Ben Shapiro said, there's no what's it called? Proportionate response.
like
They said you can do whatever you want.
Okay, so like my question is like if 10,000 lives are okay just to get rid of Hamas, why not wipe them all out? What's the limit, guys? 15,000 too much. 14,999 okay. Oh, that's the fifth hospital? 4 was okay. 5 is like, what's the limit? You guys are not seeing the logic here. What's the limit? What is the correct way to go about this? It's only one way, man. And you got to go in man to man with the actual forces. Airstrikes are not meant for this kind of thing because of the devastation it will have. Gaza will never be able to recover from this, you know?
There's also no doubt that for many living in Gaza, for many innocent Palestinians, it's, as we know, of the 2 million or so residents and citizens there, they, I think it's more than half are of child age, and many are very young
50%
children.
of Gaza are children. Netanyahu gives them a couple days to evacuate to the south. You guys, do you not hear how insane all of this is? This is madness. This is madness what's happening. This is a disproportionate response. This is collective punishment on a people who you oppressed first. Do not think the war started October 7th.
Yeah, children, they literally did nothing.
If you believe that, you're actually a clown. What's been happening what's this whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict? You think it was just born yesterday? It did not start yesterday. It all happened when their land started to be taken away, when the British installed them in there, when they started to seize the land, when they started to kill indiscriminately. This is the whole origin of why all these things happen, where Hamas came from. Why is there even a Gaza today? How did they get narrowed down into the strip? All this is because they're just a barbaric state before the beautiful Israelis came in and just saved the day.
Many children
Look at how
are
beautiful they are.
getting killed.
3,000
And
kids.
as a father, I'm sure, as like me, as a father, it is utterly heartbreaking to see so many thousands of children being killed who have nothing, obviously, to do with this. Again, this comes back to this moral quandary I have. It was interesting when you said enough is enough in that tweet. Some people are already saying, even if they're very sympathetic to Israel's need to take out Hamas, they're looking at these fairly apocalyptic scenes in Gaza and thinking, enough is enough of that. In other words, the revenge is already far greater in terms of death toll than the original appalling terror attacks. That again is where I have a moral quandary.
Kids alone, far more kids have died than the total amount of Israelis that died.
Yeah, by a long shot.
Oh,
It's literally exponential. It's disgusting.
Well, the question is, I suppose, and I don't purport to have an answer to this, is the most effective way of combating Hamas military? And part of the answer to that is the military eradication of Hamas even possible? Because as I said, and we can see it.
Actually, first off, this is his response to what Piers just said about thousands of kids being killed who are innocent. And I was just saying, maybe we should switch up the tactics? That's just, what the hell
But this is like, I hope you guys are seeing what Jordan is saying, because this is the point. Can you really even get rid of Hamas? What's the real only way to get rid of Hamas? Like, the way they're doing it, the only way it would make sense to really exterminate every last one of them is to end Gaza. And if you guys think that that is okay, then you're I mean, what can I say about you? I can say the same thing about the Israeli military forces. What do you think we think they are? A terrorist state. That's what they are. Look what they're doing to kids, man. Look what they're doing to residential areas, hospitals. Like, this is an insane level of and what is this? You guys are not seeing this? They are a terrorist state. So then, you know what I mean? Like, then if you were to just flip their narrative, Hamas can bomb Israel as much as they can to get rid of the Israeli military and government because they're all terrorists. They can just wipe out all of Israel. That is not okay. And I don't think that's a good response at all. I think that's a horrific response. Countless civilians and innocents will die. I don't think that's the way to solve this issue at all. I don't think the vice versa is also a way to solve this. But what are you guys okay with? Wipe out all of as many as Gaza, the people of Gaza as possible. How do you get rid of all of them? How do you, okay, what's their main goal? Eradicate Gaza. What's the best way to get rid of Hamas for sure? Sorry, get rid of Hamas. What's the best way of getting rid of Hamas? Just completely leveling Gaza. As some politicians say, turning it into a parking lot.
It unfolding in real time. As Israel's more successful militarily and the casualties mount, the resistance to what they're doing is going to grow.
Is that surprising?
And so even if they could take out Hamas militarily,
okay,
which isn't
their military can go so much, what if they can just drop one nuke and everything? There's a level of response that doesn't apply. It's not a hard concept. You got to go in there and rip the weeds out with your hands, unfortunately. That's the situation you have created. Why do you think our boys in the U.S. have had to go to overseas and over soil and fight wars they don't even know? They're all of history, the Vietnam, all this, right? Because of the political turmoil and conflict. The solution is not just completely annihilate a country with bombs and kill all these civilians.
Yeah.
Obvious given its interpenetration with the civilian population. All of what's going to be played out is going to be played out on the military front. And we can see that in the rising tide, let's say, of demonstrations around the Western world. And I would say those demonstrations are likely to get larger and more effective in precise proportion to Israel's success on the military side. And so then I would think, well, is there another way of restraining Hamas? And well, that brings us back to the Abraham Accords, because they were the most promising thing that's happened in 7 decades. And I think it's easy to underestimate what a miracle they were. The people who formulated the Abraham Accords had to fight the State Department. They tried to introduce it under Obama to begin with, right? The notion was, well, maybe we could start the peace process with Israel without putting the Palestinians first. And that had been off the table conceptually in the State Department, as far as I've been informed, forever. And then it was proposed during the Obama era, and it was rejected. And then it was proposed during the beginning of the Trump era and rejected, but eventually they carried the day. And then they did do an end run. And I think that was actually good for the typical Palestinian, because it put a tremendous amount of pressure on the Palestinian authorities, who are basically tyrants, who are more than willing to use their own citizens as cannon fodder. It put a lot of pressure on them to actually do something moving towards a genuine peace, which is why now that's why Iran is so desperate to scuttling accords, I think.
Of course.
So I think the way through Hamas, all things considered in the medium to long run, is to desperately extend the Abraham Accords as rapidly as possible. That's not a military victory, but,
when
it's
you
easy to do this from the armchair.
When you look at the full history of this conflict, the 7 decades of conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, Jonathan Friedland is a very good, respected Jewish journalist for The Guardian in the UK. He wrote a very interesting column the other day saying, you could argue that both sides have a just cause here. And he said that as a leading Jewish commentator, that historically, both sides have a just cause.
It's the same argumentation used by the Nazis to exterminate the Jews. This is like, they're literally repeating history, except that it was done to them. Oh, the Jews are no good. There's people among them that are corrupt for societies. If we just get rid of all of them, it makes sense for us to preserve our values. It's like you hear a lot of the same rhetoric in a way,
Yeah.
It's important to remember that. And that's why passions run so high. It's why people care so much. And it's why racing to take sides is a mistake in this conflict. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that, if there wasn't a lot to be said on both sides, then the conflict wouldn't drag on forever and be unresolvable. I think at some point you do something like cut the Gordian knot, which I do think to some degree the Abraham Accords had begun to do. I don't think Israel's going away. But I don't think
taking such a innocent worldview that, we're just trying to come to the best solution. No, Israel is backed by superpowers. They have interests in the Middle East. That's why they want Israel there. And Israel obviously wants its own sovereignty, wants its own land, wants its own government and state, even if it means replacing another. And the Palestinians are suffering at the hands of that by having their land wrongfully taken from them, and now they're being wiped out. because of the resistance group trying to retaliate after 7 years of this oppression. Because of that retaliation seen as just an independent terror attack that had nothing to do with the 7 years of decades of conflict for some reason. They just established a 7 years of conflict, or 7 decades of conflict, and all of a sudden acting like it's just some random spurious terrorist attack, right? Why is that not seen like a response, like Hamas is now, or like the Israeli forces are now responding?
Yeah, I mean, to bring up the historical part, if you want to say both sides have some truth to it, you can argue that, but it all started when the Jewish people took the Palestinians' land to begin with. Exactly. So it doesn't, like, the origin of it all was the Jewish or even the Zionist political people just taking the land, and they had a war backed by other people and superpowers in the 40s, and then they just took it, and that's what they're saying. Oh, we won the war, so we're good.
70% of the Palestinians that live in Gaza, they're not native to Gaza. They're from other areas of Palestine that have now been colonized, taken over. Does that not tell you guys something? I mean, it's one thing if you don't care and you think like good riddance. You know, if you're like anti-Islamic people, or anti-rate or whatever, anti-Arab or something. You're just, there's no use to even speaking to you people. But if you actually are trying to justify that in some other way, you can't. You're just witnessing, it's just theft and oppression.
Palestine isn't going away either. And so those things have to be accepted. It looks to me like they have to be accepted as on the ground realities. Now, the problem I've seen continually, I don't know, is that it's been convenient to use the Palestinians as an irritant to Israel in the West. And so the Palestinians have been held hostage. The people who portray them as innocent victims presume that the Palestinians have been held hostage by the Jews, let's say. But I would say the Palestinians have been held hostage even more effectively by their own leadership and by those who are perfectly willing to use them as the front man, the expendable front man to irritate Israel in the West.
He's using the word victim in a way like he almost doesn't even want to say it, like he's grinding his teeth. Oh, they're just playing the victim card and they're victims. No, they're like real, but saying they're really not. But then calling them victims because of their own government. Their own government hasn't bombed them with white phosphorus, annihilating their hospitals and their residential areas, which for these kind of attacks has birthed Hamas. This is not the first time also they've suffered airstrikes and being bombed. This is not the first time at all. Not on this level or, in this kind of just in your face, bold attack. But I mean, this is their history. This is their history for the past 70 years. It's just being attacked, bombarded, land being stolen. This is how these kind of groups form.
Well, you can't get peace under those circumstances, and so Palestine is a reality that isn't going to go away, and Israel's a reality that isn't going to go away, and the Abraham Accords started to recognize that, and there was move in the right direction, and if that falls apart, we're going to be back to where we were 15 years ago, except worse.
The interesting moment for me came when Israel turned off the power and the water. They just were able to do that.
Turned off the power and then told them through Israeli TV in English to evacuate. Like they're going to see that.
They literally had no way to see that.
Or sending a message. To who? How many people are going to see that message if they have no power? People don't think, man. They don't think about
2 million people in Gaza. They could turn off the internet. And it struck me that was a very vivid reminder that Israel effectively controls Gaza. It doesn't do so politically, but it does in reality.
They control them. They control what goes in and out of Gaza. They have control over all the borders. That's what's surprising to me, by the way, how they didn't see this attack coming. When they have eyes and ears all over Gaza, they completely control Gaza.
If they control the internet, how do they not even know anything?
Guys, how is this a war? Look at the Palestinians. Look at the devastation. Look at the rubble. Look what they fight with. Look at the missiles that they produce. And look at Israel. You think this is a war? It's one side has been genocided and now it's on the max speed. It's just they're just being completely eliminated and erased from an excuse made by this attack from Hamas. And you guys think this is some kind of just, response. Oh, it's just, we're getting one back at you. We're teaching them a lesson. We're just getting rid of Hamas. You're getting rid of the Palestinians in Gaza.
Reality. and that for many young people in Gaza, they know this, and they do feel that they've been living in a perpetual prison camp where their movement is controlled, where their access to basic things like water and energy and so on is controlled, and that until they get the freedom that they crave, this can never get resolved.
Well,
but I also understand on the other side that the Israelis feel, how can we
Why does
give
Piers
freedom
have
to
to just let it just stay
I know
like
you
that?
see how he had to like comfort
Yeah.
him immediately.
a place that is run by a terror group who are literally committed to the eradication of not only Israel, but all Jewish people?
Well,
This terror group that they have to lie about beheading 40 babies never happened. Raping the captives that there's no
Even if you
reports
think
on
it's
that as
from
well.
a terror group, why are you cutting off water and everything to innocents?
Did you
Doesn't
see
make
those
sense.
Israeli captives they gave back? And how she gave salam and she spoke only goodness about them? And how, oh, they took care of us, they fed us, they did. I mean, that's, so I mean, don't believe everything you guys see and hear, by the way, about Hamas. Even the Palestinians, do your own research. Don't just take these guys' words for it. They're terrorists, this, that, whatever. Yeah, I think launching rockets indiscriminately into Israel is wrong. But then if you're gonna say that's terrorism, which okay, we can agree to that. That means the IDF and the Israeli military are also terrorists. And if you can't say that, then you're a hypocrite. Whatever's happening to these Palestinian killed kids, women. I mean, more civilians died this way. It's not just. I mean, it's been done with war crime. It's not just like a retribution or revenge or a tactical play to get rid of the enemy. No, this is like overkilling it. That's not terrorism. I don't know what is.
You laid out what are the two sets of valid counterclaims. I mean, there's another complicating factor too. You said that your moral back is up because of the continual toll in civilians in Palestine, especially among people who, let's say, weren't even born when they first came to power. And so it's very difficult to look at that and see it as anything but unjust. But then it begs a whole other set of questions too, doesn't it? It's like, well, if your government is a totalitarian band of armed criminal thugs, what responsibility do you bear for that as these subjected people? And it's not like I know the answer to that. But, I see
no responsibility. What the hell? If 50% of the population are kids, how do you not know the answer if they're responsible for this backwards totalitarian thug group you're talking about? You're out of your mind. 50% of the population are kids. The answer is they don't have responsibility. They don't know what's happening. They already live controlled. They don't know when they're gonna have electricity. Their water and food is controlled. They don't live in the best conditions. How are they supposed to be upkeeping with the politics? They don't even know what even happens. They just live in this small prison with 2 million other people, and they're barely able to live a sustaining life because they don't know when more land is gonna be taken, when they're gonna be attacked more, or they don't know if Hamas is gonna do something that's gonna get them in the middle of trouble, and they don't have control over that.
My own country in Canada, that things are slipping and sliding in all sorts of pathological directions, and people are letting it happen. And if you let that happen long enough, well, things get very, very bad. And they have got very, very bad in Palestine. And the answer to whatever tyranny Israel might be exerting over the Palestinians isn't for the Palestinians to exert even more tyranny over themselves, especially not in concert with a third party like Iran, who's perfectly willing to sacrifice them at any point. And so now, and then that question emerges, well, what responsibility do the Palestinians bear? Well, then I think we start to touch on more metaphysical issues. It's like, well, the Palestinians, like all people, bear the responsibility to live in truth and to stand up to tyranny in their deeds, their attention and their deeds and their actions. Because if you don't, you pay for that, and so do your children. Right? And then so do your grandchildren, and so do your great-grandchildren. There seems to be something unjust in that why did the children suffer? And the biblical answer to that has always been, well, the children suffer for the sins of their forefathers. And you might think, well, it's pretty unfair that the world is set up that way. It's like, hey, it might be unfair, but
This guy
it is
actually out of his mind. Suffering for the sins of your forefathers. But you can call them sins, but they're the only group that has this the last line of defense for the Palestinians in Gaza. What are they supposed to do then? exterminate Hamas on their own with their limited equipment and with 50% of kids, you somehow exterminate Hamas. Then when they do that, then what? What defense do they have? What offense do they have? Israel can do anything they want to the Palestinians in Gaza, which they already have been doing. But the only hesitancy is probably like when Hamas throws some kind of rogue attack into Israel.
Is set up that way, and it does beg the question: what responsibility do the people who are living under the thumb of totalitarians have for the fact that they're living under the thumb of totalitarians? And the answer isn't none. So this is why I'm a psychologist, not a politician. I think
it's a really interesting question. It's also an interesting question: why won't Arab states around Gaza take in Palestinian refugees? I mean, these are legitimate questions.
Right. Well, there's a lot of chain and saber rattling about how tyrannical Israel is, and of course, they're held to a very.
Gazans can barely even get out of Gaza, and if these other Arab governments or countries are not taking in refugees, that doesn't reflect on the Palestinian people themselves. It just shows how hypocritical those Arab countries are. Most of them are now siding with Israel anyway for their own self-interest, because they're just bowing down to their superpowers now, right?
Yeah.
And
I heard Egypt is taking in some refugees now in the last day or so.
Yeah, but it was like such a problem to do
took
that.
like weeks.
And we don't want them to be refugees anywhere. We want them to have their own land. We don't want them to go to Turkey and Egypt and all these Muslim countries or Arab countries, Iraq and Saudi Arabia. That's not a viable solution. A viable solution is giving them their homeland, because you know how hard it is to take refugees and to integrate them into another society. That is a very difficult thing to do. Refugees can be very problematic, especially if they have trauma from all the warfare that they've seen for 7 decades. I can totally understand why a government wouldn't want to take in refugees. This is such an unrelated point. What is he trying to say about the Palestinian people then? Are you trying to justify them being seen as animals that should all be wiped out because no one else should take them in and they're all crazy backwards and just support their terrorist Hamas organization? That's all he's doing. He's just trying to paint a negative picture of the Palestinians. He's being such a clown. This is not a refugee matter. They should need their own land back. This is not even a two-state solution. Abraham Accords, whatever you want to call it. They have nothing left. They're being squeezed into a small strip. The land that's being seized needs to stop. They need their land back. Israel should be under Palestinian control again. And if people are going to say, they're going to go on a rampage and killing Israelis, I don't believe that's going to happen. I really don't. They're the ones who with open arms accepted the Israeli who were supposed to be refugees or settlers coming in, after the World War. But then look what happened. I think if you give them time, give them their own government, give them their own stability back. Think of it like Salahuddin Ayyubi. Think about Umar ibn al-Khattab. Think about all the other times the Jews and the Muslims or any other community lived under the Palestinian lands when it was under an Islamic rule. There was peace, prosperity. Think about Salahuddin Ayyubi. Even the Catholics respect him. If you guys seen that movie Kingdom of Heaven, or Umar ibn al-Khattab, when he arrived to Jerusalem, he said, "Where are the Jewish families?" And then the predecessors who, before they switched over to Umar ibn al-Khattab, they said, "Oh, there's none left. They've been removed or killed." He goes, and then he sent his men to go and get 80 Jewish families that had been displaced from those lands and brought them back. Right? The Palestinian people are not calling for the death of all the Israeli citizens or Jews or whatever. What's the number one thing they want is their land. That's what they're fighting for. Look at how those Hamas fighters treated those captives. That should tell you what their true intentions are.
Very higher moral standard, but the prison that is Palestine has walls on sides that aren't Israeli. So, and that no one, certainly not the progressives, will never talk about that. And that's partly because, all the oppressed people are equally morally virtuous. And so the fact that the Arabs won't take in the Palestinians, you can't even bring that up because, of course, the Arabs themselves are victims of
why is it their responsibility? Why is it just because they're Arab? You see how dumb that sounds? That Egypt and Saudi Arabia, why do they have to open their borders for these people who come from a war-torn nation? I would be hesitant on doing that as well. That is such a dumb point.
colonialism, which is, one of the most absurd propositions ever set forth by anyone about anything. But, here we are. And it is quite a miracle in some ways that the multidimensional fact of Palestinian enslavement isn't discussed in a much more forthright manner. There's many people are building the walls that make Palestine into whatever prison it is. And perhaps the Israelis are playing their role, but they're by no means the only actors.
Let's talk about the
main
response of progressives, and in particular, what's happening on student campuses, particularly in
He's
America.
sitting here talking about the Palestinians. He's talking about their government. He's talking about other governments. He's talking about Iran. Why is he acting like Israel is like blemishless and what they're doing is perfectly like it's difficult to swallow, but it's like the most pure thing that they can do. He just shows how incredibly biased he is. He's not even critically thinking for a little bit. I'm over here saying, hey, Hamas shouldn't be launching missiles indiscriminately into Israel, and that these other governments, I could understand why they're hesitant in taking Palestinian refugees just because of the kind of war-torn conditions that they're being taken from, right? I can understand the hesitancy, and it's not even their problem. They're a separate nation, Arab nation government, right? So I'm trying to like see
dodging like kind of the main points and using other stuff against Palestinians.
Yeah.
It's obviously because of his career. He can't say anything in his affiliations. I think we can end it here for now. Do a part 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll end it here because it's a long interview. If you guys want to see a part 2, let us know if this video even gets up. Inshallah. Yeah, let us know your thoughts on what we said, and Jordan and Piers. Piers is not even saying anything. He's not even. Doesn't even make sense.
He's being very listening. Good boy today.
He's not interrupting. Doesn't even seem like the same person.
Yeah.
Kind of weird. But yeah, if you guys enjoyed and want to see part 2, like and subscribe. And assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.